a little more background on me. I was raised apolitical in a very religious family. And so I did get involved in politics until I was an adult. So when I first started getting into politics and understanding the two-party system, immediately I was like, oh, this is like really wrong. This is backwards, and like started digging into politics and registered as an independent so I could vote. Um, on who I thought was going to be best for the economy. So I started into politics very business focused because I'd been in small business since a teenager, helping run a family business. Um, so bipartisanship came pretty natural for me. And I started, when I started talking more about politics in the last few years, I realized that it's really hard, especially if you've been raised in an environment where you are programmed to be partisan, that it's very, very easy to bring partisanship into the conversation and really, really vouch for one side or the other and have a us versus them mentality. And I started having conversations with my friends and other business owners about policy and legislation, how we can make changes. And it kept coming up, certain parties or certain representatives and who they're representing was standing in the way of really being able to be effective and have conversations with the legislator or with fellow business owners. And so I've really been practicing depolarizing my own conversations, as well as helping others in my circle depolarize theirs so that we can find common grounds, learn to have productive conversations, and advocate on both sides of the aisle for legislation that impacts women business owners, small business owners, both at our states and federal level. When I joined NABO Philly, it was specifically to participate in a women lobbying organization that was very attractive to me because I'd been part of a small business organization, which was for both men, all small businesses, men or women owned. And I did want to have more impact for women's voices because we are the smallest of the small businesses. And excuse me, these are falling out of my ears. um, so that was a real attraction. I joined the board as advocacy chair for this term. And one of the gals, Stephanie, and I had this really long conversation about our own journeys. And we got on a phone call that was supposed to be 30 minutes and talked for an hour and a half about our own experiences of experiencing partisanship and how we've had to work really hard on those conversations and make them civil. And we said, why aren't we having more of these conversations as a chapter? Like, we're an advocacy organization and we're not really having this conversation at a chapter level. So we said, let's make a training. So we took our conversation and built a training with it called Depolarizing Discussions. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. This is intended to be a conversation. So there's about 20 minutes of me talking sporadically throughout the training, but this is intended for you to share stories, to converse amongst yourselves and talk about your own life experience in a safe space where you can talk about times you've had a partisan view or times your view has been changed, interactions you've had in your community or with other business owners, things you'd like to think about differently. Um, those are all things that we can discuss here. And it's okay to admit if we are partisan and are trying to change that. That's what this training is about. So I hope you find it valuable and we'll get started. Give me a second to start the screen share. Okay. I hope you can see the right screen and not my prompt screen. All right, great. So we've gotten started. Recognizing the problem is always the very first part of understanding how to have a discussion when we're not aware of it, which I believe probably almost all of you are, that there's polarized conversations. That's when, excuse me, that's when we have to realize that we need to start this conversation. Um, One of the biggest parts of this discussion, not this discussion, but talking between ourselves in our community, is a fear factor. As politics have become more divisive, as social media has definitely become more polarized, people make strong stances. Our friends, if you don't vote for so and so, you can't be my friend. These types of things. We become more and more afraid to engage in conversations, afraid it will damage our businesses. Um, we don't want to be attacked for our personal stances, either online or in person. Um, and we believe, and rightfully so, that we may risk losing our relationships, funding sources, community support, or more, even physical violence at times. These are all uh, part of the problem that we face as women business owners when it comes to engaging in advocacy and being a voice for what we believe in or what we would like to see happen in the legislative landscape. Um, One of the big pieces of why this conversation, why here, is that we are an advocacy organization. And while we love all of the networking and the events and all the fun things that come with being part of a women's organization, we're also centered around advocacy. And it's easy to forget that in the joys of all the other things that this organization provides to women. And bringing this conversation front and center helps us to focus back on the fact that NABO is a political advocacy organization. And in order to advocate, we need to engage in political conversations and do that in a bipartisan way, which means depolarizing those conversations as much as possible. The goal of today, like I said, help us get more comfortable with having those conversations, talk about our experiences, and be able to, when we walk away from this, be more comfortable with engaging in substantial conversations with people who we don't see eye to eye with, and do that in a bipartisan way. So this is going to go into an interactive time where we can talk about life experiences, things you've experienced. And so I think the best way to do this, since we have a large group, is that people can raise their virtual hand and I can call on you to share your experience. Because we're a large group, I would say be mindful of the time that you share, and let's keep it under like 3 minutes for a story if you can. I have one myself, but since I've been talking so much, I'm going to let you start with the sharing. Who would like to be first? Raise your virtual hands, and let's talk about some times when you have had to resolve political conflict of some kind, or a story of the problem where you've experienced it and weren't able to resolve it. Sylvia, go ahead.
There are many stories I can share. I'll start with one that's close to my heart, and and it wasn't really a political discussion, but of course now it is, and I just shared a story about someone needing medical attention due to a miscarriage and not being able to get the assistance they needed because the state where that person lived had outlawed or made it made it a crime to receive medical attention. And even though I think one party kind of have been talking about that issue a lot more, I didn't try to make it a political one side of the party versus one party versus another party. I just shared the human side of that story and the implication that it had on that family.
Yeah, being able to share like the human side of legislation effects is so important. Um, I think that's a beautiful story. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.
Annabeth.
Hello, everyone. So I don't know that I necessarily have a story, except I did want to say, like when you were reading that first slide, the problem, I was like, yes, yes, right, because that is one of the challenges. I am very strong in my own political beliefs, but I'm not in the majority, and so that's where I've kind of struggled about making sure that I don't put politics into my business, because for the all the problems that are listed there. So it is one of those ones that when I start seeing it going into that direction, I've always got to pull back. And I'm very interested to learn, like, how do we find that happy medium? Because I don't want to judge anyone on their political beliefs, right? I mean, that is part of what America is to have those freedoms for those options. Um, but I just wanted to share that the problem area really hit me hard. And I don't want it to be about, one party's right and the other's wrong type of thing. And just learning about, okay, how can I not allow that to happen and yet still feel the freedom to be able to share my own beliefs?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really good. I think the problem hits us all, you know, really, really keenly. Rosalind.
Hi, everyone. We actually had an issue that came up within our chapter where one of our uh, board members posted something that was very much towards one side, and another chapter member actually sent an email to us, and I'm the advocacy chair, obviously, and our president saying that this was horrible. This was not a great representation of NABO. And it was interesting because NABO wasn't tagged in it. NABO wasn't a part of it at all. But because she was a board member, there was, a conflict on how this member viewed it and versus how this board of director, who they were supporting. So we addressed it head on. We came together with the president, obviously me, and then past president who is actually an attorney. And we just talked about how we are bipartisan. This was her own personal social media, and that she can express those views. That is not the view of NABO. And so we just really kind of came at it with a head-on approach. I then also worked with our programming board of director, and we just did last week a how to have civility in during an election season, and we had the League of Women Voters come and help us understand the amendments and those areas where it was most important for business owners. So I think having that space that was truly bipartisan and bringing in an expert voice to help guide that conversation was wildly successful.
That's a really great story. Thanks, Rosalind. Carnella.
Hello, thank you, thank you. Um, it goes back to emphasizing DEI and B. We will have to do much better as NABO because there's always going to be something, whether it's religion or it's the politics. It doesn't make a difference. We are all unique. And on your personal page, it's your personal page. And we have to remember that. We don't address it enough. And I think we need to, because it may be politics this week, like I said, it may be religion next week. It's always going to be something. And we will lose a lot of people if we spend more time trying to critique somebody's personal page, opposed to saying we're all diverse. We all have our opinions about things. And so as long as NABO is not tagged, we can I've been struggling with this ever since I read it in the paperwork. As long as NABO's not tagged, we have to be careful with telling people what they can and cannot do on their page. Because it could be a client and you're arguing, but somebody else loves this client. And I can say Elon Musk, I can use any one of them. You know, we all have various opinions, and we are trying to control people's opinion. And that's where we really need to have more conversation about DEIMV. And I rest my case. And I hope that was helpful, because it has been weighing on my spirit very hard lately. This particular question and issue.
Thank you, Carnella. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's important that we really look at why it is important to be a part of the political sphere. That's why we're here, right? And how we can get together and make things happen in a positive way. And for us, it's for business, particularly for women businesses, but all small business in all reality. Once we're raised, all our others, I believe, are raised. I truly believe in the power and of everyone knowing their representative, regardless of what side of the fence they are. You need to know your representative. You need to be able, they need to know your face. They need to know that you're the expert in your field and that you stand, whether you stand for NABO or whatever other things you stand for, other organizations, that you are going to, you know who they are and you are going to be watching them and they work for you. I think that is incredibly powerful. I think we need to talk about that more, why it is important to get involved. And I understand what we're going through here because so much of it is truly emotional, but laws drive the way we do business. So thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Nicole, go ahead. And after this, if there's one more person, we'll take one more and then move on. There'll be more time to share. So we'll have a few of these sharing times. Go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I want to piggyback what Megan said. I had a situation with a peer of mine who's not a normal member, but knows that I'm active in advocacy, and actually came to me with some concern because he's actually transgender male, and as you know, it's a very it can be an uncomfortable climate for those with disabilities and transgender and the minority and things of that nature. And what was really important to me was that to let him know exactly where he could go. So Megan really hit it on the nail because some of these issues are so sensitive and we have no idea what people have experienced in their lives that led them to the opinions that they have. Whether or not they opposed my view, it didn't matter. My only purpose was to educate him on where he could go to actually advocate for his issues. And he left the call feeling very empowered and very grateful because I wasn't belittling him. I wasn't, even leading him into a conversation of why this person's better than that one or whatever. It was just all about, look, here's your state representative. This is where you can go. Why don't you send them a letter? These are the chains that you can go in there. And as advocacy directors, I feel like that's really what the main purpose for us, just to navigate the political field for others so they can know where they can have their voices and opinions or whatever expressed in a fair and a safe way, so they can really feel heard. And I think being heard, especially if you're someone of a minority or disability or anyone of that group, is extremely valuable because that's something that we've never had in the past. And it's wonderful that we can do that right now. So all of us as representatives, I feel like we owe that to everyone in our community to be that voice.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay, we're going to move on to the next slide. I loved all of these different stories, and it brings out how much each of us are facing the problem. And some of you talked about how you started to resolve these issues as you face them. One of the things that I wanted to talk about right here in the beginning of this discussion is, why do we engage? And what do each one of us hope to gain when we engage in a conversation with someone. For me and Stephanie, when we were designing this training, we came up with 3 core reasons that we believed that we wanted to engage with people in these types of discussions. And that was to help drive beneficial change, to build stronger relationships, and stay true to our core values. Those are like 3 really key things for us. I wonder if any of you have any other reasons that you want to engage in these types of conversations. And this could be like a one sentence. If you have a one sentence of why you want to engage, raise your hand. Janedra.
Yeah, because I want to understand, not necessarily agree, but I want to understand how a person got to their opinion.
Oh, I love that so much. Annabeth.
Mine's somewhat similar is, I'm trying to gain a different perspective, right? Sometimes our own opinions, we've got these blind sides on, but learning about somebody's perspective may open my eyes to something I had never considered before.
Amazing. Carnella.
The engagement allows me to hear somebody's story and be able to show compassion, to sympathize with them, and to be able to find ways to help them. And I put it in a post, and I'll quickly say, last weekend and at the White House representing the Southeastern region, it was amazing. It was about 4 of us from NABO, and many of them didn't know about NABO. We told them we were anxious to tell them about NABO, but we related to so many stories in the room, or could point them to why NABO, why advocacy, and how NABO has made a difference in our lives and our businesses. So if I engage for any other reason, the most important thing for me is to be able to point them to a resource, and NABO is a great resource.
I love that. That's awesome. So we have so many reasons that we want to engage. The next question comes on when. Knowing why we want to engage is going to help us to know when to engage. One of the biggest pieces that we need to ask is, what am I risking by engaging? This comes down, and I really loved, one of you girls talked about the individual, the transgender individual, where he is struggling to find his voice. And this came up when we were designing this program is, am I the best person to have this conversation? What if you're a vulnerable population, or you have a really specific issue that's affecting you, and going into a discussion about that issue could be harmful for you, for your mental health, or if the discussion doesn't go the way you were hoping, it could lead to depression or anxiety, things like this. What are you risking engaging in the conversation? This is an important self-analysis to know when to engage. Who is vulnerable in the situation? It's often easier to advocate for someone else who's in a vulnerable position, say someone who's low income, they need housing, they need food. While people can speak for themselves from those positions, it's often more powerful if others advocate on their behalf, because someone going into advocate for themselves where housing is an issue, they may receive criticism for being in that situation because they're going into a confrontational situation where someone believes you have to always pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? So there's situations where it may not be right for that individual to be the one advocating for themselves, and being able to know where we're vulnerable and where we're strong and where we can advocate, and when it's the right time for us to advocate on which issue is this really, really important piece of this. We don't have to be the advocate for every issue if we're a vulnerable person. The other question is, who might be well placed to act as an ally for us or for that individual? So thinking of this in all of our members, if we're training them, maybe you know you're vulnerable and they can come to you as an advocacy chair and say, I really think we should be advocating for this, and can you be an ally for me? Be able to ask ourselves or be an ally for someone who isn't well placed to be an advocate. Um, and then we can ask ourselves, who are we advocating for? And know that we're best when we advocate for others and as a group and this comes about in legislation very powerfully, is that if you go in and say, yes, a story, that's great, here's how it's affecting me, but when you say this is affecting this many women business owners, it's different, right? People are like, oh, how many thousands of business owners are NABO members and you're all having the same issue? Okay, we need to do something about this because we're advocating for others. And it's not just one single voice. It's the power of saying we rather than I. And that's when we can know to engage for us, when we can say, this is about us. This is about this demographic. And I have the capacity and the knowledge to advocate for this. And we have less risk when we're saying we versus I. On the next thing is, what problem am I trying to solve? Being really, really clear. Sometimes we argue because we're bored. We want a distraction. If social media is a great example of this, right? We're scrolling on social media and we see this post that's blowing up about some controversial issue. We just have to jump in there, and next thing we know, we're engaging in this really confrontational discussion on some polarized or controversial issue. Are we solving a problem by arguing with strangers on the internet? Not necessarily, but you may be solving your problem of boredom. So that's something to be aware of. Are you trying to punish bad people? Are you trying to prove your rights? These are all things that we have to look at our intention of engaging in the discussion and say, is this really, what am I going to solve taking this approach? Is this the problem I want to solve? Like we talked about earlier, do I want to build a strategic relationship? Absolutely, engage. This is problem-solving behavior for us. Do I want to co-create a good policy? Yes, wahoo. This was Stephanie's edition. I love it. And so knowing what problem we're trying to solve is a super important piece of this. So what am I risking? What problem am I trying to solve? And is everyone acting in good faith? This piece, I think, is really, really important to understand, is that you may go into a discussion with a good heart, wanting it to be open conversation, but is the entire discussion an open discussion? Are all parties involved wanting it to be depolarized? There are toxic conversations. There's arguing to do damage rather than to solve a problem. And when you engage in toxic relationships, toxic conversations, it's draining, it's harmful, and unfortunately, rarely effective. I have a situation with a family member who is very far right, and we don't see eye to eye on politics or really many things in life. And I was sharing with him that I was doing this. They're my family, talked to them on the phone. And when we did our very first one of these, I was driving to Philly to host this with our board of directors and share our very first depolarizing discussion. And so I was talking about it, very excited. I'm going to do this. And he said, oh, I should come with you and I will convert them all over to vote for Trump, make America great again. And he started really ranting on his um, whole conspiracy theories and a bunch of other stuff. And I was like, we're not going to talk about this. You know what? Let's talk about something different because um, being raised in a very religious and community, there are certain things we can't talk about. Um, this comes back to my role as a woman in the workplace, um, and not being the helpmate I was raised to be, the bread maker and the cook and the housewife. And we can't have that conversation because I'm outside of the will of God. And there's certain times when that relationship and those conversations are just toxic. And I have to turn and walk away, or have to say, you know what, we're not going to agree on this. So we're not going to have this conversation, because for me, that's a vulnerable relationship. It's my family, and I know that there's no good thing that's going to come out of engaging in that conversation. um so there's times to say this other person isn't acting in good faith. We're not trying to have a productive conversation. This is going to end up with me getting hurt, and I have to step back. I think I'm going to pause here before we go to the next slide on how to engage. Does anyone have an example of one of these last three, like the risk, the problem, or the relationship of the intentions of the other person? Does anyone have anything they'd like to share? Elisa, go ahead.
I'm a little different in that I would say I've been very open about my opinions, and it was definitely a risk that I took. So I'm a financial advisor. And when I started out in the business, one of my managers um, questioned the fact that when I did my bio, I included organizations that I was on the board or very active with. Um, and one of which was Planned Parenthood. And the manager asked me, he goes, well, why would you put that on your bio page? It could be controversial for clients. And I said, for me, it was about acting in good faith and on my values. And I didn't want to hide my values. And so if that was offensive to someone else or not in their belief, then they were going to choose to probably not work with me. And that was the risk that I took in doing that. My personal page, I try not to ever have anything offensive, but my business and professional page does list organizations that I'm involved with, and they're probably very partisan, and they're very clear about where I would stand politically. And so for me, it's been very beneficial in that it attracts clients that have similar views and values, where we work together to put those values to work in their portfolios. But it was definitely a risk that I had to evaluate. I don't ever engage in toxic conversations. But I am seen as kind of a leader of, if somebody wants more information about specific subjects, that people will come to me, and I'm probably good at listening, but definitely giving my opinion on views. It Because I'm very open in, I think, a positive way about organizations that I belong to and things that I do. People who disagree with my views very vehemently generally don't engage me in those conversations. So I haven't had to be in positions where somebody, really didn't like what I stood for or the values that I stand for. So it's actually been a risk that I was willing to take, and a good risk for me.
Thank you, Lisa. Hillary, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, and sorry about my webcams not working today, but I did want to kind of piggyback on what I've heard so far and share. There was one time, about a year and a half ago or so, when I attended as a guest because I was a part of NABO and our advocacy committee in our chapter to another organization, and at that organization, I was having great conversations with other women business owners and political legislators in our state house. And as soon as they heard that I was with NABO or a part of NABO, they didn't react super great. There are some folks who felt a little put off by what they call gendered politics, which we were not even discussing anything like that. But I took that as a note of that was a good instance to hold space for initial reactions and how people were feeling on their side of the aisle or whatever they wanted to talk about, and not push an engagement there, but just allow them to have their opinion and hold space for them. And if they wanted to know more, like Lisa said, talk more if they ask for more, but not, engage in folks who just want to play devil's advocate or, conversations like that. So I think, Nicole had mentioned holding space for other beliefs as well. And I think that's a great, way to go about, so we can know when to engage and how to go about it.
Awesome. I love that. I had an experience, and this is one of my stories, is I'm on a advocacy committee for our local chamber of commerce, where we do a lot of work at the state level. And a couple of weeks ago, actually a couple of months ago now, we had a gal come in and do a briefing on the paid family leave expansion that we're working on at a state level. And she did a really good presentation. We have some concerns about the way the legislation is written, for sure. But one of our advocacy members at the chamber there was very, very strongly opposed. He was very, very aggressive in the meeting. Said a lot of strong things. And I was asking a lot of questions of the gal that was there, interested in it, especially because it's something that's a agenda for NABO and something we want to be involved in the conversation with. And in that meeting, it was kind of like me versus him, me showing interest and saying, okay, how can we work together on this? And the other gentleman being like, no, just say no. Like, we are not going to endorse this. Like, and I wouldn't say it was a showdown in front of everyone, but it was definitely conflict. Definitely conflicts. So after the meeting, I sent him an email and I said, hey, Scott, can we meet for coffee? I'd like to continue the discussion. I'd like to understand your point of view, because I see some benefits of this. And obviously you feel really, really strongly that this is going to negatively impact the small business community. Can we talk about it? And Scott, he was a little hesitant, and we had to reschedule twice, but we finally made it for coffee and sat down, and he was hedgy. And I was like, hey, I'm not here to like persuade you. I just want to hear your side. Like, why do you feel so strongly against this? And we actually ended up having a really, really good conversation. And he changed my mind about some of the questions we should be asking the state in this piece of legislation. And he talked about his experience of being a small business with 10 employees, but he's a staffing agency. So he technically has about 200 employees because he's a small business that gets treated like a large business in his industry. Um, and already dealing with FMLA and the impact it's been on him. He just went on and on about all the unintended consequences and how difficult it is. And listening to him, I realized, oh, okay, he's speaking out of a pain in his own small business and the effects this is having. How can we make the state legislation better so that it actually, for other small businesses, don't experience the pains he's experiencing? And when we met for coffee, the guards came down. He came into it like this, like, I'm not sure I want to talk to you. You're obviously, want to harm my business by wanting this legislation. And we left as friends and saying, okay, let's continue the conversation. Let's follow up. Let's work on this together. And Scott and I have a much better relationship now. And that was a really good experience for me to engage with someone in my local community that had such a strong opposition to something, who felt it was extremely partisan, whereas we as an organization have already said, we feel like this is a bipartisan issue. We should all be working together to help this legislation through, where we have other people who don't agree with us that it's a bipartisan issue. And being able to hear their side and walk through that is really, really important, to be able to understand and go through this risk assessment. For me, it was low risk conversation. It was a good time to engage. It was productive because we're both advocacy committee members and we both want to make change. And it was that perfect situation where we should engage in this conversation. We can have a civil conversation and we can continue to work together because we're both committed to that and to the success of our community. And I really, really love that experience, to be able to see something go through so successfully. Moving on into, and this takes us into our, how story segues into how to engage. Because for me, it was setting that boundary where I knew I'm safe. I'm safe to talk to Scott. Scott's not going to personally attack me. We can do this. We can sit down, have a professional conversation. And I approached it with curiosity, and that lowered his guards to be able to say, I'm seeing a totally different perspective. Can you explain to me how you feel? Can you share your story of the impact this is on your business? And if I could say any characteristic for us as leaders in the advocacy space, leading with curiosity and engaging with curiosity, wanting to understand and not to convince, is one of the most important pieces of engaging in a depolarizing way. This is asking questions. Even when think you know the answer, don't assume that you know what someone's going to say. Empathize. Think about what it's like to be in their shoes, what they might be feeling, the experiences that they might have had, because we all go through things in life that bring us to certain conclusions, that make us see through a certain lens. Lead with empathy. Avoid hot button phrases, and you know which ones those are. We don't have to dig into that one too far. They've gotten super popular. And this next one is really about listening to understand, not to respond. Don't stop until you can explain the other person's perspective so well that they know you understood them. Listen to understand them. So often we're in a rush to prove our point that we listen to respond. So, I can't emphasize enough that it's so important to slow down and listen to understand the other person. Listen to understand their experience. And this comes back to empathy. Stand in their shoes, imagine yourself in their place so that you truly, truly could feel their position. This is one of the most important pieces of lowering the guards in a relationship and in a conversation. The other piece is finding your shared values and work from there. With me and Scott, we both want people to have great access to take care of their family. We want them to be able to afford to take care of their family, right? Now, that's the common ground we shared. How that happens, and if that's through the state or some other way, that's where the conversation and the piece that we have to work on. How should this happen? But we have a shared value that family is important, that women are the primary caretakers, and that someone needs to take care of them. Who should do that is the piece that we need to work on. But when you find the common ground, that is so, so important. And it's different from compromise. That is really, really important to understand. When you're finding common ground, you're not compromising your values. Almost always, I always say this in politics, about 80 or 90% of us all want the same thing. We want to be able to pay our bills. We want to be able to retire at a decent age. We want groceries to be affordable. We want to live a good life, to go on vacations, to send our kids to college and have them in good schools, right? So these are things that we can find common ground on for almost all Americans. We come back to what is it that we want, what shared value. And a concern is different from a policy recommendation. And debating is not problem solving. The next point is create an environment where we are allies, looking at a problem, not making one another a conversation. And this is where Scott and I are now working as allies together on the committee, because we realize, and Scott realizes, there's legislation in the House and the Senate. We're not going to stop the train. Like, we're going to help form this legislation. We're not going to stop the legislation. So we're now working together in this committee to help create this FMLA expansion into our state, paid family leave, in a way that it will be beneficial to all small business owners. And I see a comment here from Janedra. Did you want to, I can stop here. If people have comments, the next slide here we're going to go into is like sharing more stories, your takeaways from this, things like that. And I know some of you might have to jump at the top of the hour because you didn't have more time on your calendar, but we can go for another 30 minutes in this last section where we have more time to share and talk. So if you can stay, feel free to stay. If you have to jump at the top of the hour, we understand. So raise your hands and to share. This is time to just talk about your stories and things that came up as we were talking through this, your thoughts, and more like specific topics if we want to dig into real specific things. Elle, go ahead.
Because I know some people are gonna have to hop at noon, so I wanted to make sure, or sorry, it's everybody's in a different time zone. It's noon here, so I'm thinking in my brain. I wanted to remind everyone, because I wanted y'all to have an open dialogue, and I didn't want to insert myself while y'all were having the conversation, but I did want to do a friendly reminder that we totally understand, NABO National totally understands that everyone has different political viewpoints and wants to go out and support their political candidates. What we've asked is that if you are a member of your NABO chapter board, you are a leader of a bipartisan organization, you can attend events, you can support candidates financially. Our only request is that you don't broadcast these things in televised interviews or social media, because what happens is similar to what happened in South Florida. It also happens that reporters will then go and look in your background and utilize those as putting it on NABO. So like they'll go and look on your LinkedIn, see that you're part of NABO's board, see your social media post, and connect the two. So we're trying to be very intentional about how we're advising you guys as a member of your NABO chapter board. That is not to say that we should never have tougher conversations. We shouldn't talk about our viewpoints. By no means. It's just from an outward standpoint, so we can have civil discourse and so our organization can continue its bipartisan way to ensure that members of Congress won't see things and then get confused as to organization was bipartisan. Why am I seeing this on their social media? We've thought through this, and that's what we're requesting of board members. So I just wanted to clarify that dialogue at the beginning, and there were some questions in the chat. So I just wanted to clarify on because I know people will be hopping.
Wrestling, go ahead.
Thank you, Elle, for that. I think it's important to know you have to address it head on. You can't hide behind it. I think when the person made the statement about this person being being very partisan, she didn't realize she was being partisan as well, right? And we're all a part of a bipartisan organization. Even still, that carried on. That wasn't the only thing. Like when this person will be in a very commanding role without kind of giving it away in our organization, and people are like, oh, I think we need to rethink that. I don't think she should be the next whatever. And I think we have to address that. Like we have to be able to speak in an intelligent way. And I love the fact that we learned that debating is not problem solving, and don't stop until you can explain the other person's perspective. It's powerful. So thank you for this training and the safety to be vulnerable and talk about ways that we can remain curious as business leaders within NABO.
Thank you, Rosalind. Sandy, go ahead.
Disha, you may, because you were engaged in giving the presentation, you may not have seen that there was a lot of requests in the chat for the slide deck. Is it possible to share this slide deck so people can use it within their chapters and communities to help get the message, keep the message rolling out there, kind of thing?
Yes, yeah, of course. I can provide the slide deck to Elle and she can send it out with the recording. And you can always, tweak it a little bit if you need to, as far as like there's some like share Disha's story or something like that here. So you could put your own stories in there as well.
Thank you.
This is the end of the presentation. So the end of this is just a open dialogue. So I'm going to stop the share and we can just have people talk, amongst ourselves. If people have more stories, they want to talk about their key takeaways, what impacted them, let you raise your hand and share more. Go ahead, Hillary.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. I think it's going to be super helpful to share, with my committee and with the chapter at large in Columbus, Ohio. But I wanted to kind of also emphasize some of the things that have worked when we're talking with our legislators. Ohio can be quite, in actuality, the swing state, even if, elections are showing otherwise as of late. But some of the phrases that we've found that really kind of find that common ground are when we explicitly say like, no judgment. I just want to make sure my assumptions are correct and reflect back what you're hearing so that people can actually hear that you understand and not just think, oh, I hope they get it, or I bet they don't get it. And then also, to an earlier point in the presentation, being able to tie into how policies and actions that we're asking for as an organization can help other groups at large. Like a lot of the micro business pieces that we've been talking about really help so many other businesses as well. that can really help find common ground and break down those assumptions when you're going into a meeting.
Absolutely. Really great input. Thank you, Hillary. Someone else?
I'll just echo the impact that sort of coming at things with a sense of curiosity and finding that common ground is so powerful. And I think that can take us so far. And I know other people have already said that, but I just wanted to emphasize that that really can be a difference maker.
Thank you, Megan. Liz, I see you're off mute.
Yeah, so I'm really intrigued by this whole conversation and about the spider webbing that we can accomplish great things. So here we are going from the I to the we and doing it in thoughtful ways. And, you know, as sort of a newbie in NABO and advocacy, I've only been in a couple years now. I'm trying to think how to deploy this starting out, meaning the big picture of there's more than just NABO. There are other groups out there, and the conversation right now is divisive. And so I'm like rolling around in my mind how to have the conversation. And it's like right now in our meetings, and I don't mean to talk badly, I just it's an observation that we talk to people, but we don't engage. And as much as I think would be helpful, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, who knows? So all these things are rattling around in my brain, and I'm obviously will process it after this call. So number one, that's a big, maybe even a rhetorical question. And number two, I'm extremely thankful for this whole presentation. It's thought-provoking, it's real, and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Liz. Any other input, ladies? If not, we'll turn it back to Elle.
I wanted to share my perspective as someone who grew up overseas and moved to the US 10 years ago. And I had my own, I was not raised on either sides. So I just had my own neutral views that aligned at that time with one side. And then since then, I moved to the US about 13 years ago. And obviously I came to the realization just being here about how divided the country is. I just didn't have that kind of perspective, being a foreigner and then becoming a US citizen a few years ago. And my views have shifted since then through new experiences and being physically in the US and experiencing certain things. And it goes to confirm exactly what was discussed earlier, how our experiences shape us. And I think what has helped me remain, I guess, true to my values, but also accepting of others and embracing other people's views and just not necessarily I have to agree with them, but I show no resistance. I understand that their views is not them. It's just they're part of their experience in life. And I look for the common ground. And the common ground for me, before anything else, is that there's this human being who's sitting next to me or having a conversation with me. We have more in common than what separates us. I mean, you add to that just being American and caring for this country and wanting the best for our children and the future of this country. That's, for me, that's enough. And that unites me with every single individual that I encounter. And I thought that maybe because I have this outsider perspective, I would share that. And it's interesting even to me how my own views have changed before I lived in the US and after. And it's so I kind of understand both sides. And I would say, I don't want to say I know exactly how the other side thinks, because I've been like on each side almost equally, feeling equally strong about it, and I know what led to those views. So just a perspective that is kind of different from everything else that was shared today.
That
Thank
was really valuable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Disha. I think if nobody else has anything else, Megan, was there anything you want to share before we got off?
Again, just thank you to Disha. This was absolutely fabulous. And I do just want to put in that reminder that when you are a board member, it is a bit of a public position, and you know, as Elle covered earlier, so just be cautious. I think somebody posted in here, you know, one of the best ways to handle this is just encourage people to get out and vote, right? And not you know, blast as much on social media as you might be tempted to.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Thank you, Disha, for an amazing conversation and dialogue. I know this is only the beginning, and hopefully you can send the slides my way. I can get this recording and the slides out to everyone, and we can continue this conversation because it is very, very important.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.